Hi, Ethan. Welcome to the Architectural Technology Podcast.
Hi, Jonathan. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. It's good to see you again. Ethan, last week we looked at digital literacy and we started to move towards the next stage, which would be BIM. We talked about digital literacy in basic terms, file maintenance, all that kind of stuff. But what about when it gets to learning some of these CAD programs? Doesn't their lack of digital literacy then really start to impact them?
I think so, a bit, because all the CAD is when we teach CAD, we need to teach everything. So sometimes I didn't even notice that they're lacking of digital literacy in the classroom.
Not until they
Because
do a BIM model.
yeah, so that's when I say that. Okay, can you click this one? Click that one. So that's what happened. So I didn't notice that, and only when before the submissions of the file, I don't know where I saved my file.
This was my point last week, wasn't it? That the student wouldn't know where to save their file. And then next week, when you get them to open up their file to work on it, they can't remember where they stored it because they have no concept of file management. And I know it sounds esoteric, or it sounds like I'm somehow an obsessive compulsive because I want files to be stored in a special place. There was an advert on television a while ago, a Sky advert, and these two flatmates decided they'd have this new system of storing everything on the floor because it was their new filing system. And they just put everything on the floor that they wanted to find because it would be easy, until that got so messy that they couldn't find anything. And that's a little bit like students with storing their information poorly. If they don't store it accurately, then they don't know where to find the information when it becomes due. And if a student's been working on a project and they have to hand it in, where's all the documentation that goes with that project? So we talked last week about that, but now I'd love to look at it. How does that impact their ability to learn? Because now it's a much more complex topic, because we're not just teaching how to store a file, we've also got all that data that goes with the information. So we've got a project, we've got a BIM program, we're going to put information, we're going to build and put information in our model, and that information needs to come from a source. So we might be getting it from a master spec or some sort of specification system. We might be requiring the students to look online, find information, and then transfer that information into our computer program. So we're really getting them to not just the basic tasks, but also navigating the software, and setting up file paths, managing shared files, and the cognitive load becomes really overwhelming, leading to disengagement, frustration, that kind of stuff. So that worried me. That's where the students were heading with that stuff. I mean, just from a simple point of view, we're asking students to produce documentation for assessments. And often the students don't know how to collate that information. They don't know how to put the maps into the assessment at the right place. They don't know how to set up their assessments with the right headings so that we can find the information when we need to. The simple answer is that we need to scaffold the learning process, and which we've tried to do in lots of cases. When I was teaching the ArchiCAD, I really tried to make sure that we were scaffolding that learning. But it still doesn't change the fact that they have to take complex information and their design and then put it into the BIM program. And when they leave us and go and work in an office, they'll be working in a multi-user environment in many cases. Not only will they be doing a little bit of work on this part of the building, but other people will be working on that building together. And now it's really important that they don't make a mistake.
Yeah, when I look at the teaching and learning, it's always difficult, especially when this year I need to teach BIM, Revit. This year I'll be teaching Revit and my colleague will teaching ArchiCAD at the same time. There are two software we'll be teaching at the same times. The student will really confuse on top of the managing the so
I
yeah,
really feel sorry for that student.
yeah, yeah. Plus digital literacy and those things, I don't really know what will happen. So that's the thing. My colleague, he wants me to teach first, Revit first, and in a few weeks later, he'll be teaching ArchiCAD. Yeah. So on top of digital literacy and file management, there are things that we'll be encountering, and we'll see what will happen. And currently, I'm teaching some theoretical perspective. Yeah, I need to teach them why BIM, what is BIM, what are the difference between 3D and BIM, which is a lot of things like BIM is 3D is not BIM. Why BIM is information is important. Before BIM has been popularized, and we use the 3D models to see the clash and etc. But when it comes to when the BIM software are getting popular, and we need to feed the informations and how to manage the informations. So since we manage the information, the file storage and those getting the files informations are getting more and more popular, and there are several sources like master specs, and also sometimes you need to do your own research to feed the informations, and you need to know how the different materials works together. So it's a very steep learning curve within 3 or 4 months time, and the tutors need to put a lot of effort on it, and the students need to follow, and some students are first learners, and yeah, so that's how we have to do that. And let's see what will happen at the end of this semester. And
Yeah, let's see what's
yeah,
going to happen.
yeah, let's see
I
what happens,
do.
because we've been teaching a few years, so every batch is different. Some batch it's like a people to people, batch by batch, also the different behavior. Some batch they are a group of first learners, some batch they are a bit slow, but slow and steady and give a good output. Some very talkative, some like to questions a lot. So that kind of things. And yeah, anyway, and with any group, I enjoy teaching. And also while I'm teaching, I'm also learning. So that's how is it. And yeah, just yeah, to go back to BIM is for the informations. It's a lot of information. The most important thing is informations, and you need to manage the information management. That's why previous podcasts we talk about the file storage and management, because what you mentioned is that how the file has been stored, and not just that, when you do presentations, you also need to make sure for, oh, when I present the sheet number one to the clients, I switch off these layers, and now I don't remember which layer I switch it on and switch off and on. That kind of things is always it happens, during AutoCAD times. BIM also the same. Revit or those BIM software also the same thing we encounter. So they need to learn not just using the software, they also need to keep track of the works and the documentations, etc. So that's the BIM learning curve. This podcast, we are only talking about the file storage of the learning curve. So that's even the file storage is quite a steep learning curve already in BIM.
And then remember that it's information. So we're getting information from a manufacturer, which we then have to transfer into our model. Otherwise, the model is not BIM, it's missing the information. And that means that the student now has to grasp grabbing information from one source and applying it to a different one in a way that software allows you to do. And not every software allows you to do it in the same way. So it's quite important that the students understand this. I feel sorry for your students learning both programs in 1 year. When I was a tutor, we would spend the first year just with ArchiCAD and the second year just with Revit, and so that they could get used to one and then get used to the other. And they can translate knowledge from one, or techniques. So they can learn to take techniques from one CAD program or one BIM program to another. Things like saved views, layers and stories and things like that can be transferred if you help them to make that translation. So instead of treating both programs as being completely different, try to look for things that you can translate for them.
Mhm.
So when students come from AutoCAD and they get into ArchiCAD, a block is a library object. So they can then, in their mind, they can connect the dots to those things. Because that's the hard thing, is when you're teaching the students, you've got to find some information that you can connect to help them remember, because if it's all brand new concepts, and that's part of the challenge with your older students, is that because they haven't got any concept that they can use to connect this new concept to, that takes them a long time to grasp it. And that's why I used the analogy, or the metaphor, I guess it is, of file storage, that the hard drive is your filing cabinet, and you open the drawer and you pull out a folder. And for old people, that seemed to make sense because they were used to that kind of old-fashioned filing. No one has that anymore. So that's a hard one to get them used to. But I think that there might be techniques. I'm not sure whether gamification can be used in teaching BIM software. That might be something you could look at, trying to make it into a game of attaching doors and windows to objects.
Or let them compete.
Let them compete. Yeah, who can build this house in 12 minutes?
None of them can.
So I think that I can see this as one step, the digital literacy, getting that right. And then step 2, making sure that BIM is using the digital literacy and the digital techniques that we need to make sure of. Because the next step on from BIM is parametric BIM, where we start to make code. We start to write code about what things happen. What is the relationship between things? You know, a typical thing would be when you put a door next to a wall, you've got to make sure that you've got at least 90 millimeters between the wall and the door. Otherwise, you can't get the door handle in, you can't get your architraves in. And so it would be really nice if you could code that in. But then that means teaching that next higher stage.
Yeah. I think we should wrap up for this topic.
Thanks very much, Ethan. Thanks for having me. Welcome, everybody. Don't forget to find us on Spotify, hit the subscribe button, and get notified next time there's another podcast.
See you.
See you
Bye.
later.